And here's that psalm, Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. May these words be to us our light and our life. Thanks be to God. In Genesis, there's a blink or you'll miss it moment. And it comes after the creation narrative, plural. It comes after Adam and Eve. It comes after the very messy Cain and Abel narrative. And it's a part that people, maybe skim over because it's a, what do you call it when you're saying a lineage? Word? A what? It's a begat, genealogy, thank you. Genealogy, and where your eyes may blur over. And then at the end of it, almost as an aside, the writer says, at that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord. That's a very significant moment. Whether you take the Bible as figurative, whether you take the Bible as literal, as historical, that moment where people turned to invoke the name of God is a very incredible change in how we lived our lives and live our lives. The question I struggle with this one, I grew up misquoting it. People called out to God. And so I didn't like that because that places God out there. All right? It's this dualism that's insane because it says, well, God is out there, so I'm separate, and this earth is forsaken, which is not good for the earth, and I don't think it squares with Jesus' theology. So I like the word invoke. Invoke to me permits an internal process. Now, David's psalm here, and just for a shortcut, I'm not going to say the writer, the psalmist, the person to whom this is attributed. Allow me just to say David, if you will. David is actually pleading. He's more than evoking, he's pleading. How long? How long? Will you forget me forever? Will you hide your face from me? Will I bear pain in my soul? Will I have sorrow in my heart? How long? How long will my enemies be exalted over me? How long? The problem with David as a figure is that even though he's expressing sentiments that may be familiar to all of us, as a character, he's less than sympathetic. He comes from a completely different culture than ours. He was a warrior. He uses words like enemy, which I think is a toxic phrase to have in our vocabulary. He saw cities as something to be conquered in the name of God. He distrusted others as if they were as untrustable as he was. David lived in a milieu that I would term a dystopia. And if that word isn't already in your vocabulary, it's been made very popular in the past maybe 6, 7, 8 years through popular culture, through the books and the films that we have. Hunger Games, Game of Thrones, Hunger Games, what's the vampire one? Twilight, the Twilight series, even Harry Potter to some degree. And a dystopia is, by definition, simplified, any place you wouldn't want to be. A miserable culture, all right? And so as I picture David, I don't envy him. I don't want to be in his place because I just say, what a horrible time to live. It must be like living in Wisconsin. And I just don't want to go there. But I think David would disagree with me. I think David would say, you know what? I don't live in a dystopia. This is what life is about. This is how a warrior lives. And this is, I hear God's voice telling me to overthrow cities. I make mistakes, but God forgives me. All is well. He would locate, perhaps, the dystopia within himself. And so I'd like to make the case this morning for this idea of a dystopia, which is the opposite of a utopia, as an internal process. As I said, dystopian societies are familiar to us, whether you realize it or not, whether you've seen Hunger Games, Twilight, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. If you've read 1984, which we all had to read, right? Or Brave New World, those are tales of dystopian societies. A bad place to be that you want to get out of. And I'd like to talk about music today because we're talking about a psalm and because on the mission trip, one of the youth challenged me to. And God bless him, he's here today to make sure that I do it. And since the 1950s, starting with either Peggy Lee or Frank Sinatra, they started in music. Okay, so we have painting, we have literature, dystopian societies in all a manner of art form. But a concept album, you know what a concept album is? Remember when you used to listen to an album from start to finish, and sometimes the artist would make it you're supposed to? Dark Side of the Moon, but we could all probably think of one, but that's one that springs to mind. And those were rich, in the 70s especially, with images of dystopian societies. And one of them that Danny and I were talking about was one that, were you even born in 97? Okay. We were talking about a band called Radiohead, and because this is what you do on a mission trip when you're waiting for your next assignment, and this album called OK Computer, and at the time that came out, I remember when it came out, and it was lauded as a piece of art about a dystopian society that is dystopian because it's been overrun by technology, which is really funny because 1997 we were all still using Palm Pilots, all right? And this is before we got chained to our iPads and our iPhones and the internet and everything. And And it was seen as kind of a portrayal of here's what technology is going to do to us. It's going to dehumanize us. It's going to attenuate relationships. It's going to, in that attenuation of relationships, it's going to turn them into hostile, cold, distant relationships. If you have seen anybody texting and just seen the top of their head for 2 hours, you will know this is coming true. But I would argue, and we'll argue, we can argue this later, that it's actually an album about hope. And let me talk more about that. Again, I think that the notion of a dystopia is subjective. I was reading an article yesterday that said we can't even claim that there is objective information out there. So much less subjective information, or subjective information becomes all the more important, although he was also arguing that doesn't exist. And so my example that comes to mind is I go to the Apple store, all right, and it's like Christmas, all right, like a happy Christmas, and I just see the potential for, wow, technology, how that opens us up to the world, and the possibilities of doing work in a better way, and being able to not be chained to an office, but to work from many places, and connect with people and other cultures. I happen to know that there are people for whom the Apple Store is seen as the staging ground for the NSA. That says it dispenses tools for the NSA to monitor our every move. My utopia is somebody's dystopia. The NSA is free to monitor me. I just am not that interesting. But if you could edit that out of the videotape, I'd appreciate it. So, Radiohead. There's this dystopia, disconnected relationships. There's some ominous songs in there about relationships. But then there's this love song. And it's called Airbag. And it's a love song to an airbag. Technology. Do you know, because I Googled this and it was on Wikipedia, so it must be true, that airbags weren't really widely used until the early 90s. Am I correct on that? Because I remember a Model T when I was a kid having an airbag. And so it was still a relatively new technology. And the love song is this. It's not a love song to the airbag per se. It's an appreciation that in the midst of this car crash that's detailed in the song, this piece of technology has saved him. And the song is a great appreciation for the second chance at life. And though he writes from a secular standpoint, he appropriates language from the Christian tradition. He says, I'm born again because of this piece of technology. And so there's that ambiguity within a dystopia. Because what's your worldview on the world we live in? I read the news this morning and I happened upon all bad news. Yesterday, not so bad. You know, it depends on the day, it depends on the website, it depends on the newspaper, it depends on your mood. But today, you know, I have this nagging feeling that everything's wrong in the world. All right, so I can walk around and that can be my worldview, if I let it. And it doesn't mean, before I go any further and forget this, it doesn't mean that we ignore what's wrong in the world. There are things wrong in the world. It's not so subjective that we can say, well, there's nothing wrong with this world. It's not getting caught up in this is a useless world. God is out there. This is a forsaken world. Therefore, let's live and die and wait for the great beyond. No, we're here. We are to tend to our suffering. We're to tend to the suffering of others. It's very real. In fact, David seems to recognize this. The first 4 verses of the psalm are down, down, down. I mean, it is some desolate stuff. When we hear it in a psalm, I think we're kind of cushioned because it's poetry. But imagine if a friend of yours came to see you today and expressed those emotions. Wouldn't you be a little worried for them? Wouldn't you want to make sure there was some safety plan in place? Who are you going to call if these feelings get worse? What are you going to do about this? So, this airbag, I was thinking more about this airbag. And, you know, in commercials, whenever you see an airbag deployed, or whenever I see an airbag deployed in a commercial, it's not a human being in the car, all right? It's a dummy. B, it billows out. It billows out like your grandmother's hugs. You are safe. Come to me. Around the time this album came out, Joe and I were in a car accident. It was Joe's fault. We were going eastbound on 97, and it wasn't Joe's fault. Kind of was. And we were in a pile-up. I mean, 94 is a death trap, let's admit it. The only thing more dangerous is that stretch of Snelling in front of Starbucks, where people just stop their cars in the middle of the road to go get coffee during rush hour. The most dangerous place. This is why we have a state of emergency in St. Paul. So this airbag came out, and instead of billowing out, it was like, and it was nylon. I don't know if they've changed them since. And it was a smack in the face. It was a punch in the face. And Joe, because he was driving, his arms were like this. And he still has the scars today from this airbag. And to me, it's the truth that we get from the Bible is like that airbag. There is hope. There is something to cushion the blow of reality, but it isn't always pretty. Jesus said, I came to bring life abundantly. Billowing airbag. But while you're alive, you will always have trouble. Nylon punch in the face. And we live with that ambiguity, that paradox, I should say. Joseph Campbell, I'm going to read this because paraphrasing it, I think, would ruin it. Joseph Campbell said, we're in a free fall into the future. We don't know where we're going. Things are changing so fast, and always when you're going through a long tunnel, anxiety comes along. And all you have to do to transform your hell into a paradise is to turn your fall into a voluntary act. It's a very interesting shift of perspective, and that's all it is. Joyful participation in the sorrows, and everything changes. Making meaning of suffering. Someone texted me last night, so what's your sermon about? I texted back really quickly what I thought it would be about. And I said, the subjective nature of pain. And we suffer pain. We suffer pleasure. And what it does to us. how do we respond to it? Radiohead, back to Radiohead. There's another beautiful moment that I think is uplifting in its reality. And the singer, narrator, whatever you want to call him, the psalmist, talks about a day when he'll grow wings, hysterical and useless. He'll never transcend the reality of the world around him. And I think this is a beautiful lesson for us as people of faith as we recognize that we engage in culture. We don't seek to escape it. We don't numb ourselves out of it. We don't ignore it. We participate in it. It's not possible to leave a wasteland when that wasteland is inside of us. And Campbell had another great quote that you might be familiar with. He said, "The darkest cave the cave we fear most contains the greatest treasure." That's a paraphrase. The cave we fear the most contains the greatest treasure. And how many of us would love to avoid knowing the fact that that power, that energy to transform our worldview is inside of us, rather than one day things will get better. One day I'll get out of this job, this family, this work situation, this whatever you're in. Paul talked about us as jars of clay with a great treasure within us. And I leave it for you to figure out the nexus between your individual being and God's Spirit. Sometimes I wish life was better. Sometimes I wish life would not change because it's going so well. And that's when I experience pain. Because I'm trying to hang on to something. I'm trying to make the world something that it's not. It just is. The inner work is for Tom to get out of the way. And like David, in verses 5 and 6 of this psalm, to just know that life just is, and it will be okay, both in the pain and in the sorrow. We don't live for one day. We live minute by minute. And hopefully conscious to everything that's going on. Not just around us, but inside of us. That breeze that's coming through that back door is a breeze, but is it a sign of life? When God breathed into the first beings, that was a breath of life, a chain of which has never been broken. It's the same breath that flows through you and I. Can we live with that just for this moment, no matter what's waiting for you outside these doors, it's all right. In your pain and in your joy. Amen.
Amen.